Being part of an innovation project is really exciting, brings its challenges, but also definitely the opportunities, and you have to have, I don't know, the guts or just something, the confidence to think, well, I really don't know if this is going to work, but now's the time to really test that out.
In Series 3 of the Carbon Copy podcast, we told the story of a community on the Norfolk coast which is being devastated by winter storms and accelerated erosion. It's a story that's mirrored in communities along the UK's coastline, all 7,700 or so miles of it. Traditional sea defences, groins, seawalls and rock breakwaters are expensive, often unsightly, and last a few decades before needing replacement. In this episode, we meet two people working on an alternative solution, one that harnesses the power of nature, creates valuable habitats for wildlife, and can also improve water quality and sequester carbon. It seems like a no-brainer, but as we discovered, innovation like this is far from the easy choice. Welcome to All Nature from the Carbon Copy podcast, with me, Isabel Sparrow. Episode 2, Sowing the Sea. It was a fairly chilly but bright Wednesday morning when Brad and I arrived at the gates to the port in Hartlepool, where Tees Rivers Trust's seagrass nursery is based. The previous night, we'd both had to complete the port's health and safety induction, and on arrival, a member of the security team had to let us through an enormous steel gate, which was locked behind us. It seemed incongruous to step inside the porter-cabin office of the programme and to talk to project manager Judy Power about nature in this most industrial of places.
So you're standing at what we call TERI, which is a Tees Estuary Restoration Initiative. We've been going as a facility since 2022. We set up from an absolute blank canvas. There was absolutely nothing on site in May 2022, and we spent May to September buying all of our outbuildings and starting to install everything.
Judy pulls a black cage up onto the desk. It's maybe around 60 centimetres tall by about 25 centimetres wide. And inside it are 3 tube-shaped columns with shelves at regular intervals on each one. It looks like a sort of model of a high-rise building made from black wire.
It is. It's a high-rise for oysters. So it's a wire cage with individual flats, if you like, for oysters to live in. And oysters don't swim, they tend to settle, and when they settle, that's it. So it doesn't cause them any harm, and it's not impeding their natural cycle. When they produce young, which is normally during sort of May to July, what they do is that they produce a larva, and the larva then settles on the nearest shell, so the oysters form almost like a biofilm over their shell that attracts the larva to them, and they just settle on that. Our native oysters are having their second birthday this week. Our first 20 cages were put into the marina at Hartlepool in September 2022. We had 600 native oysters in there. Every month we take a party of volunteers down and they monitor them for health, for biodiversity, for water quality, mortality and growth. We check to see what's in the cages. So quite often we'll find things like eel and pipefish and sticklebacks actually using these cages as refuge. The reason we're doing this is that native oysters are great filter feeders. So they take contaminants out of the water body and they process it and clean the water body up. They can process 200 litres of water a day. Just one on its own, which is more than a bathtub. They're really good at carbon sequestration as well. So when they form a reef, when they take contaminants out of the water like carbon or nutrients, they then poop anything they can't absorb out, and it goes into the sediment underneath the reef and it can't be touched. So actually really good way of taking any sort of nasties out of the water and actually keeping carbon out of that water body.
Judy's project is partially funded by the Stronger Shores programme. We'll hear more from her in a minute, but first let's get some background about Stronger Shores from delivery manager Karen Daglish.
So my name is Karen Daglish and I manage a project called Stronger Shores, which is all about learning as much as we can about some of the really special marine ecosystems and habitats we have, including oysters, seagrass and kelp forests, and learning just how important they are to protecting our coastline, protecting us from some of the increasing wave energy that we have through climate change, and really just increasing our resilience to protecting ourselves in the future. And my job is I'm really lucky. I get to meet lots of people who are at the forefront of this research, so academics at Newcastle University, Plymouth University, people who are doing really clever, exciting things around learning how to protect and look after seagrass and oysters and kelp. And I get to, I guess, in my job, bring it all together and think about how we can use this evidence in the future to make a case for funding marine habitats for coastal protection in the future through the Environment Agency. Our research is focused in the North East. I'm employed by South Tyneside Council, and we're one of 25 projects funded through the Environment Agency through its Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme. But basically that's the Environment Agency giving local authorities across the country some funding so they can try out some innovative ways to look at how we can protect our coastlines, our towns and cities from flooding in the future. But all of our sites, our case studies, our partners are in the North East of England. From Holy Island up in the north, going up towards the Scottish border, right down to Skinning Grove, which is near North Yorkshire.
The Stronger Shores project is covering such a huge area, but then again, with so many communities around the country being at risk of coastal flooding, it makes sense that the collaboration is wide-ranging and involves many different partners. I asked Karen how long the work was funded for and what the team were aiming for once it's completed.
It's a 6-year programme funded by the Environment Agency, and we're probably just over midpoint now. So the Environment Agency is very much looking at the learning from the different projects and how that's been implemented within local authorities. So we have until March 2027 to gather as much data and evidence that we can to present back to the Environment Agency and other authorities that make decisions about how we manage our coastlines as well.
Back to the port, and now we've left the warmth of the office to take a look at some of the different species the team is working on the site. First, Judy takes us to an absolutely enormous tank, around 3 metres high, circular and built from green corrugated steel. Brad and I climb the metal steps up to the top to take a look at what's inside.
Oh, wow. And it is absolutely full of shells.
Yeah, so the shells at the bottom are the scallop shells. This is what we call a spatting pond. So the larva that is produced by the oysters when they breed is called spat as it settles on shell. And this tank, we've been trialling a little bit of a new way of making a reef. So working with the wild oysters up in Sunderland, they lent us or gave us some scallop shells, which is called culch, that they had for their oyster reef that they created last year offshore. And the reason we use native oysters is because they are the ones that were found along the shores many, many years ago, so they've declined dramatically. We now have Pacific oysters, they're the ones you'll normally eat, they're the ones that you'll buy in a restaurant, but they're actually the invasive species, and they were introduced because the native oysters were in decline.
Why were the native oysters declining?
We lost native oysters for many reasons. Some of it was disease, some of it was habitat loss, some of it was just degradation of water quality. On the Tees, we lost our major oyster bed just due to industrial redevelopment. So the land that they were found on actually was reclaimed for the steelworks and chemical works. So a lot of habitat has been lost for those reasons across the whole of Europe. It's not just in Britain. But the native oysters, slightly different to the Pacific oysters because they're a rounder, flatter oyster. You might find them in the fishmongers occasionally, but they're generally the Pacifics. They grow quicker, which is why they're farmed, and that's why they were introduced. So people could still have their oysters and the farmers could have them at better cost.
I haven't even seen any seagrass yet, and I'm completely captivated. But I wonder how tricky it is to get people locally interested in this project. I asked Karen about the engagement work being delivered through Stronger Shores.
We've got a really great relationship with the wildlife trusts, and they have an engagement officer who goes out and about, is developing education packs, going to community events, doing talks, doing some community art type projects. We also have engagement lead as well at the council who's also going out doing presentations. And we've developed a number of resources that we can easily pick up and take to different events. So we're here in Hartlepool today, and this was the site of the Tall Ships Festival last summer. So we hit the ground running with that one. We came, we brought a wave tank, we let the children create a wave, like using a hand crank. And then we looked at, where does that wave hit the Lego village at the end? What happens if we put in some habitats, put in some seagrass, some kelp, some oysters? What happens then? And then you can immediately see the impact, how the waves slow down, and start to play around with things. If you don't dive, not all of us dive, if you don't sail, if you're not out on the water, you don't really see what's happening beneath the waves. So if we can make things visual and interactive and engaging and start to bring people in who wouldn't traditionally be involved in a science project. We are a research project at the end of the day, we do involve scientists, but we need to translate that evidence and learning for people who aren't necessarily in that field. Plus also, you come somewhere like Hartlepool, And people love to talk to you. They love to tell you about their experiences at the sea, what was there when they were growing up, how that's different now, what they know. I mean, it's the people who live and breathe, you know, in coastal communities who know so much more than we do, than maybe scientific data can tell us, because they've lived it. So it's really important to involve as many people as possible in the project.
Carbon Copy is a charity all about inspiring more big-thinking local action for climate and nature. We do this in part by sharing brilliant stories like this one. Stronger Shores is just one of several projects focusing on coastal and marine protection published on our website. If you're interested to learn more about nature and protecting our seas, check out the show notes for links and information. We're going back inside now, this time to a specially insulated shipping container containing a very special kind of nursery.
It's a 40-foot shipping container, nothing else. And we've kitted it out with racks. So you can see there's 3 racks with tanks in them. And they all feed into an individual tank, and the idea is that we have water that is drawn up from the Tees docks that circulates in these, but each one is independent, so it prevents the spread of disease. And in these tanks, you've got what are called spathes. Imagine, if you will, a mange tout. It's the best way of describing it. It's on a seagrass plant, that is the sort of what's called the spathe. It's the leaf where it forms a flower and it forms a pod. And what we want are these little pods, these little seeds. That's all it is. There's tiny, tiny, tiny little seeds. So when it comes to harvest time, we pick the spathe, just the spathe, not the rest of the plant, and we pop them in water. As we've got 3 tanks now with 3 separate donated areas. I'll explain that. The spathes are in there. They will rot down, so the plant material will rot. The seeds will fall to the bottom of the tank, and it's really highly technical. We use a turkey baster, and we suck up individual seeds. So this is why it's extremely labour heavy and staff heavy, this kind of thing, because we need an element of people with experience or knowledge. It has to have an element of skill to sort of be able to do the job. And it's very time consuming, picking out a seed in a tank that's, you know, sort of quite a large tank. So what we have here is, these are from our own plants that we grew. So these are plants that we've grown on site that have actually produced seed. These are from a collection we did at Linda's Farm in the beginning of August, where we collected the seed pods from a site with licence from Natural England. And they're rotting down, and the others are ones that we found in a wash-up. So when there's been a big storm, they just get ripped out of the ground, and we went and collected those. Again, everything's under licence, so everything has to be consented. We can't do anything without having permission.
There's one particular tank that Judy and team are most proud of.
We are very proud of our Tees Spathes bucket, and the reason we're proud of that is because in the Tees, we lost all our seagrass last recorded seagrass was 1969, so we lost it. We had sites all around the estuary of both different species, right up until sort of the 1950s. But again, it's industrial development, water quality, and wasting disease. There was a pathogen as well that just decimated what we had. And the final recordings of seagrass was 1969. 2 years ago, we collected these spathes. We sucked up the seeds, we processed the seeds, we planted them, and we planted them in January, as you would a normal plant, except we grow them in water. Very, very similar to what you do in a garden. We grew our own plants last year, and we had the first flowering plants in the whole country. We were quite impressed with that. First year out, we were the first ones to have flowers on our plants. We collected the seeds from last year's harvest, and we re-sowed them this year. And we've regrown them, and these ones have come from those plants. So they are realistically the true first seagrass plants grown in Teesside since 1969. So that's something, again, we're proud of. The aim is ultimately we'll get these out into the estuary and we'll have a thriving meadow in about 30 years' time.
It's hard to imagine working on a project with that kind of timescale. In 30 years' time, Judy, I hope she won't mind me saying this, will be long retired, and the world is likely to be a very different place. I ask how the team stay motivated and what makes these particular species special enough to warrant the huge effort that's being made here.
All the species we're working with complement each other, and they are species that should be in a naturally functioning estuary. The reason we're working with these species, other than the fact that we've lost them and we think they should be back, is they are very good sources of carbon sequestration. So a seagrass meadow is a very good way of creating a habitat for small marine invertebrates, for small fish. It can be a feeding ground for some birds. It's also, we know from some research done in America, and we're in the process of backing that up with research done in the UK as well, it is a really good way of locking carbon into sediment. So it can, through the seagrass, it can absorb carbon and lock it down again. So it's another sort of taking contaminants out of the water. On top of that, it's really good, when its root systems form, it can be really good at keeping the sand in situ. So when you have a patch of seagrass, a very strong, vibrant bed, it stops wave actions. So when you have a wave crashing onto a beach, without something like this, it just washes all the sand off. Whereas you put seagrass in and the roots sort of lock that sediment in place, so it breaks up that action. So it helps with coastal resilience, where you've got sort of artificial harbours and artificial estuaries with loads of concrete structures. They're now starting to see the impacts of climate change, where we've got more and more storms, higher waves, and a lot of more costly engineering work to repair those structures. Subtidal seagrass or kelp beds or native oyster reefs, intertidal, if there is a zone, will help break up that wave action. It's all part of using nature against nature, if you like. And it's cheaper in the long run. At the moment, it's probably not, but actually, once you have these things established, they are a really good, cost-effective and self-sustaining way of harnessing and combating that sort of, those effects of having more storm actions, bigger waves. As long as we look after it and as long as we don't do anything to damage it, it will be there, and it will be there, and it will continue to grow, and it will continue to do what it does best. That's what we're aiming for, is to plant, get it to the point where it is doing what we need it to do.
The project needs a lot of specialist staff support, but I wonder if there are ways for interested people, perhaps without those very niche skills, to get involved. I chatted to Karen about volunteering opportunities with Stronger Shores.
Yeah, so we do through some of our delivery partners that run projects. So, for example, we have the Wild Oyster Project, who have some oyster nursery cages up in Sunderland at the marina up there. So you can sign up, become a volunteer, do their monthly monitoring sessions. You can also join some of our sessions through community groups. We'd love to come out and talk to as many people as possible. And we're also starting some projects. So, for example, next spring, we're involved in the Beach of Dreams project, which is a national project where they're bringing people out to the coast to learn about everything you can find maybe at the seaside. And then, for example, I mean, the Great British Beach Clean, we're getting involved with that this year as well, because it's really important that people feel they can play a role. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to keep our beaches clean, just to monitor the changes. I mean, the Great British Beach Clean is so important because it's that citizen science-led data that shows us how things are changing on an annual basis. So getting involved with that as well.
Judy also talks about how local people and businesses interact with and support the work of the Tees Rivers Trust.
We work very closely with PD Ports who are our landlords, but we regularly have visits from other industrial companies. We get requests from corporates wanting to come and volunteer and do something. We work very closely with the Hartlepool Boatmen's Association, who have offered us their pontoons and help out and offer us support. They're the guys that have been out working the estuary for decades. They give us an awful lot of good and local knowledge. A lot of what we do, I mean, we're the Tees Rivers Trust, so this is one end of what we do. We are looking and always mindful that whatever we do in the estuary will impact upstream. If we can work on restoring the estuary, then we can also have an impact on what's going upstream in terms of water quality. But also we're working upstream with landowners and farmers and industry up there. So there's quite a lot of industry upstream, and we work with them as well to make sure that what comes downstream is as clean as possible, or free from sediment, which is a massive issue, or nutrients. So it's that catchment-wide solution, because these species and water quality in the environment doesn't stop just because a political boundary is there, or because, you know, geographic, it's not salty, it's fresh. They all impact on each other, and we have some species in common anyway, but birds particularly will fly up and down the river. So it's really important to sort of have that connection not just to the species, but to communities and the industry and businesses and farmers and landowners, just to make sure that it's a holistic approach to the whole environmental improvement.
We've left the shipping container with its seed collection tanks now, and we've headed into a large polytunnel. In here, there are several big square tanks that look a bit like hot tubs.
In this polytunnel, we have 5 large tanks, all filled from the docks, so it's constant water stream, constantly being pumped in and around and circulated. Each tank can operate individually. Again, that's important for biosecurity. We might be working with species from somewhere else in the country, so we have to make sure that it doesn't contaminate the Tees water. So in this particular tank, these are the last remaining plants ready for pollination. They're all the same species, so you can see the variety of different sizes and lengths. Some of them are quite short, and they were grown in one type of sediment locally, and these are quite much longer. So the difference in length is, for us, it's interesting, something we want to look at more next year. But different types of local sediment have grown different, exactly the same plant. It's seagrass looks, it's simplistic to say it looks like grass, but that's basically, it is what it says on the tin. So you can see, I have one in my hands here, which is starting to die back because it'll die back annually, but it has a flower on it. There's a tiniest, and it is the most small flower going on this plant. And the reason why it's not a spectacular bloom is that it doesn't need to put any effort into pollinating. There are no pollinators in the water, it just releases the pollen and gets caught by these little prongs. So that when I say flower, it's like a little tiny prong sticking out of the pod. And it just circulates and it catches it, and that's how they pollinate. So they're a bit lazy, they don't have to really look particularly pretty to attract bees or anything to do the work for them. When people go down to a beach in winter, they're not going to see green like this, they're just going to see mud. So it's very difficult sometimes to get people enthused when it's not the time of year for the green stuff to be coming out. But it doesn't produce flowers, as I say, it just looks like green. It is just green grass. Then the aim is to put mature plants this sort of size of 30 centimetres out into the estuary, so that rather than putting just seeds, we'll be putting the plants out to give them a chance.
I love hearing Judy talk about the seagrass. I can tell she really cares about this work and about this part of the world. I want to know how she ended up here, in a polytunnel, in a port in Hartlepool. Was this her dream?
I'm actually an imposter, so I have no ecology training. I have no ecology degree. I'm actually a linguist who fell into ecology just by dint of working with funding, and through funding then got into project management and was project managing on nature reserves, and that's how I've ended up doing what I do. So I've learned a lot on the job rather than any other way. So yeah, this was never what I was intending to do. And to be fair, 3 years ago, if you'd asked me about seagrass, I probably would have struggled to tell you what it looked like. This river is really important because I'm born and bred the other side of the river. I have lived away, I still do live away, but actually being able to see a change in the river's water quality, in biodiversity, in just what's going on is really important. Not just for me, but for my kids and for any potential children they might have. It's really, really important, and it makes it very easy when you've had a bad day at the office to still sort of think, yeah, I've done okay. And it makes life easy. But yeah, it's important to me. The whole restoration of the Tees is something that I'm very, very passionate about.
Karen has also come to this project from a non-expert background.
So I have a background of engagement, environmental engagement. So I did go down the environmental science route at university at Newcastle, but then quickly fell into looking at how we can engage people with their environment. I worked on reclamation schemes from old collieries, and then started to come back into the environmental world, I guess, managing landscape partnership schemes, then found myself managing a marine partnership scheme, and I think it just opened my mind to what was out there. I'd always had an interest in the environment and the sea. I don't live too far from the sea now, but just learning, like you talked about oxygen, but the fact that 50% of our oxygen comes from the ocean, which it just found out, when I found that out about 6 or 7 years ago, it just blew my mind. And I thought, well, if I'm kind of clued up a little bit and in the circles, but I don't know all these things, then what hope have we have of anyone else who's not in this world of knowing these things? So when you can start to talk about, children come to our events and we'll say, have you done photosynthesis at school? Yes, I have. Well, did you know plants photosynthesize underwater as well? Seagrass is the only flowering plant that grows underwater. All these different things that happens that we just don't see. When you can start to relate to it, to what we need, as a species, we need oxygen, we need clean air, we need clean water, we need carbon to be locked away in sediment and sand, then it's really making that accessible and important. That's my driver, is just getting those messages and connecting people to what they can't see. And I think I can come at that because I'm also coming through this journey at the same time with people.
Stronger Shores is a programme of innovation. It's a pilot programme to help local authorities and other institutions understand more about harnessing nature to protect coastal communities. Judy tells me more about the relationship between Tees Rivers Trust and the programme.
The programme it has loads of different elements to it. Out in the meadows where the seagrass is growing, we have to preserve those meadows, we have to look after them. This allows us in this nursery to look at what's going on, to allow us to sort of play a little bit, if you like, with the plants, so we can split the rhizomes. We're not going to damage an ecosystem or a meadow out in the wild. We can do that in this nursery, and we're learning so much about, for example, in the tank where we have the same species that we planted but in different sediments growing at different sizes. But this allows us that innovation. And that's one of the elements to Stronger Shores, is that innovation and learning. And the more we learn about these species, the more that we can, when we come to actually deliver on the ground, we know we're doing the right thing and we can see where we can deploy these things properly.
Karen told me more about how this innovation and learning will be put to use going forward.
We're looking to, by March 2027, produce a toolkit that local authorities, the Environment Agency and other interested bodies can use, so they can have access to a toolkit that will be interactive and we'll share our learning, what worked well, what didn't work so well, what we found. That will also include case studies around engagement and different tools that we've developed. We're developing a digital engagement tool as well. So we very much do want to do that, but it will probably come more 2026, 2027. So in the meantime, we're at the stage that we want everybody else's learning and sharing as well. So we have this amazing opportunity to try things differently, to look differently about how we can do things, versus balancing against our responsibility to the Environment Agency, it's public money, and evidencing the impact and being accountable for that as well. So I'm proud of some of the decisions we've had to make together as a project, because they haven't been easy, but ultimately they will lead us, to maybe having a better way forward in the future, for breaking some of the rules that we didn't think traditionally you wouldn't be able to do because the funding won't allow you to. So being part of an innovation project is really exciting, brings its challenges, but also definitely the opportunities. And you have to have, I think, the guts or just something, the confidence to think, well, I really don't know if this is going to work, but now's the time to really test that out. So I'm proud of the decisions we've had to take, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where that takes us over the next few years.
In this series, we're looking at nature from all angles, and learning that as much as we have a role in protecting nature and the natural environment, it has a hugely important role in protecting and supporting us as well. Stronger Shores is a fantastic example of collaborative working, bringing together academia, local government, science and industry to protect nature and be protected by it. To learn more about the project or about any of the organisations mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes. You've been listening to All Nature from the Carbon Copy podcast. This episode was written and presented by me, Isabel Sparrow. Our producer and editor is Bradley Ingham. Huge thanks to our guests, Karen Daglish and Judy Power, and to you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it with others to help more people discover this fascinating story. Until next time, goodbye.